Chapter 11. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as Xenia stepped into the long hallway, she heaved a sigh of relief, noticing that no one was guarding the place. Seems to her like an overconfident king thought no one would dare attack him anyways. And so she began her daring escape plan. Looking back at her mental map of the castle, she could probably retrace her steps all the way out to the front gates. Granted, she didn't know what to do after she got out of the palace walls, but it was at least going to be better than being a so-called warrior servant of a king that she didn't even recognize as her sovereign. Just have to be careful, the incognito princess whispered to herself, her sword at the ready as she peeked outside her room. No guards, at least. That makes things easier. Keeping her silence, Xenia tiptoed her way out of her room for the night. Her injuries made it harder to move in a relatively quiet way, but she soldiered through the pain, her determination fueling her actions as she kept her guard up. So far so good, she muttered to herself as she navigated the dimly lit hallways of the palace. The security's pretty lax for a king. Xenia almost wanted to laugh when a sharp pain shot through her ribs, reminding her that she really shouldn't push herself too hard. Instead, she should focus more on finding her way out of this foreign death trap. Slinking through the halls of the palace, Xenia could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on its end as she felt another presence near her. Quickly moving to the nearest corner, she held her breath as a guard passed her by. Each step echoed throughout the hallway, the guard's heavy boots made a clacking sound on the stone floor as he slowly passed her by. Soon enough, the danger passed, and she breathed out a sigh of relief as she took a brief glance at the now empty hallway. That was close, she gasped out, her hand still clutching her sword tightly to her chest. She shook her head at her situation. A part of her knew that what she was doing was futile, that there was simply no way that a king would have security as lax as what she was going through right now. Sooner or later, she'll get caught, and she didn't know what would become of her then. Maybe she'd get thrown back into the pit to die. Or worse, maybe her identity will come out, and this king could use her as a bargaining chip against her own home. But all those risks were worth it even if she had a 1% chance of succeeding at this plan. Xenia hissed through her teeth as she tried her best to clear her thoughts. Thinking about the worst-case scenario now would only make her lose focus. Even if it was useless, at least she could say that she tried if she got caught. Right, nodding to herself, Xenia continued with her daring escape, stealthily walking through each and every open door that she came across. The darkness of the night helped her immensely, shielding her from the few guards that she came across. However, a sneaking suspicion suddenly dawned on her just as she reached the palace gardens. Wait, aren't they werewolves? The question almost made her quit her plans right then and there. Supposedly, werewolves had a heightened sense of smell and hearing. And with her tendency to whisper to herself, as well as with the amount of blood still seeping through what meager bandages she had wrapped around herself, it was more than likely that they could see her coming from even miles away. Xenia's eyes widened at the revelation. Leaning on the closest wall, it seemed as if the wind was abruptly taken off her sails, her body letting its protests known as pain radiated from her injuries. Still, she already got this far. There was no way she wouldn't try to move forward. I can do this. Psyching herself up, she took her next step forward, only to trip as the pain became too much. Stabbing her sword on the ground, she used her weapon for support as the night sky above illuminated the area. There were no guards, but she still felt as if somebody was watching her. Damn it, she cursed to herself. She really thought that her body would at least give her its cooperation today. I can't become a slave, she hissed through gritted teeth as the pain became almost unbearable, but the thoughts of her sister urged her to move on, be brave and live through this just for now. Dragging herself forward, Xenia forced her body to move despite its injuries. Pain echoed from her body, humming with every step she took forward, her vision blurring as the moon above seemingly mocked her for even thinking of trying to escape. As she took another step, Xenia tripped on her own foot, her body landing unceremoniously on the ground with a light thud. Her consciousness was still there, but it was quickly fading despite her own protests. Get up, she growled to herself, her heart pumping madly inside her chest. Get up, damn it, grabbing onto her sword, she used it for support as she barely managed to stand. Her hearing was starting to fail her now, and she was about to take another step forward again when an imposing figure suddenly blocked her way. Zen. She flinched at the familiar tone. Her injuries might be far too extensive for her to fight, but she didn't want to go down without even trying. If he was going to throw her in the pit to die, she might as well die fighting him. Stop this foolishness. Ignoring his words, Xenia weakly drew her sword up to her shoulder, her knees buckling as she attempted a weak strike at the king in front of her. Predictably, she missed. You're still injured, the king droned out. She didn't care. If this was her last chance at life, she could at least maybe land a small blow at her captor. Maybe even a small wound would suffice. It didn't matter. At least she managed to spite him for killing her. With a growl, Xenia heaved her sword once more, hoping to at least take a glance out of the man that took away her freedom. Unfortunately, she missed once again, the tip of her sword unceremoniously hitting the ground as she panted. Enough of this. Before she could even move, the king had already moved behind her. His arms then scooped her up from the ground, her weak body barely giving resistance as he carried her back into the palace. With a sigh, Xenia made her peace. She thought that she was going back to the pit to die. And why shouldn't she? She tried to escape, after all. But when she was suddenly back in her room once again, she couldn't help but ask herself as the king left her to herself. Why not just kill her? What was the point of stalling the inevitable and giving her hope? Chapter 12. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'm really such a fool, Xenia weakly uttered to herself, her gaze lifted to the door where the king just left. She bit her lower lip as she sighed deeply and whispered, I am sorry. She was sorry to her family and to herself because she failed. Not to mention the punishment the king would give her soon. She defied the ruthless king and it was inevitable that she would face the consequences for it. She looked around the chamber and sighed. Something seemed not right though. How come she was back inside this chamber? Instead of being thrown into the dungeon or prison. The door swung open and she barely caught her breath thinking it was her doom that had come to get her now. But her brows furrowed seeing it was Terra walking towards her. What have you done? I told you to rest. The king called me to attend to your wounds, Terra informed. He did? Xenia asked in disbelief. Was she spared? Or probably the king simply wanted her to recover before he would throw her into his pit to fight. It could be the pit then since it was the only rational explanation for the king to let a healer check her wounds. Xenia heard Terra's chuckle so she stared at her with knitted brows. Stop worrying. You'll be in safe hands with the king, Zen. Now, I will apply ointments on you now so you better clear your head and just simply rest. Tomorrow you'll be as good as new. Rest. How could I? Xenia murmured with a shrug. Drink this. It will help. Like I said, your sister will be fine, Terra reiterated as she handed her a bottle. Then Terra started replacing her bandages after applying some ointments to her wounds. Xenia could only sigh as she simply drank the medicine from the bottle in one gulp. She opened her mouth to say something but the door swung open the second time. This time Xenia's face paled as she eyed the king who stomped in her direction with his piercing gaze directed at hers. She could hear the loud thumping of her heart through her chest. She slowly bowed her head, unable to meet his scrutinizing gaze. How is he? The king's authoritative voice roared inside the chamber. He will be fine, your majesty. He has already drank the potion I made to heal the remaining wounds left overnight. All he needs now is a good night's rest. Terra answered. Is he fit to travel tomorrow? The king inquired, with his eyes still boring holes at her. She felt herself shrink back. Xenia could not explain the weird feeling. How come he looks calm? Is he not mad that I tried to escape? She pondered while biting her inner cheek. She even saw concern in his eyes while checking in on her condition from Terra. Was she simply hallucinating? He'll be fit to travel tomorrow morning, Your Majesty, Terra answered with a reassuring smile. Xenia's eyes widened, realizing that the conversation going on between Terra and the king about the traveling was something she didn't know, so she subconsciously murmured, "Travel." Looking at her, the king plainly answered, "I will bring you with me." "Ha! Where?" Xenia asked, finally looking up to meet his gaze. "To the kingdom of Ebodia," King Darius answered dismissively. "Ebodia." Xenia gasped and then her eyes darted to Terra, who only gave her a slight reassuring nod. She wondered if the woman had another vision about this situation. Xenia dragged her questioning eyes back to the king. "I don't go to gatherings such as that, but the king of Ebodia specifically asked for my presence, mentioning that he had something important to discuss with me," the king nonchalantly commented. She almost forgot that all the rulers from all over the various lands would most likely attend the wedding. And, of course, Darius, as king of Cordon, wouldn't miss such a great opportunity to talk about possible alliances with other kingdoms having the same advocacies and goals, either for peace, unity, or war. Xenia subconsciously stared at Darius with parted lips. The vampire king had asked for one of her father's daughters to solidify a coalition by the hand of marriage. If her father asked for Darius, then it was possible that he would ask for another alliance. It was only logical. Her father feared the kingdom of Helion, which did nothing but wage war against other kingdoms and annex their territories after the fact. They were expanding, and Ebodia would be a potential target the moment they ran out of weaker kingdoms to target. And their definition of weak apparently meant being ruled chiefly by humans, the weakest entity in their eyes. It can't be. She quietly yelped inwardly at the realization. Xenia looked at King Darius suspiciously, wondering if the king before her would do the same as how the vampire king had asked for a marriage of alliance with one of her father's daughters. Among all rulers, her brother Ezekiel once said that Darius, a werewolf king of the kingdom of Cordon, and Nikolai, a vampire king of the kingdom of Valkrez, were the best choices for an alliance because, unlike other rulers, they were known to have great respect for humans. Could she be right? Would Darius ask for a princess to secure an alliance? Still, she learned early on that werewolves had their destined mates. Darius was an alpha, so there should be a destined Luna for him. "We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow, so it'll be best that you recuperate from your injuries," King Darius said. He then looked at Terra and signaled for the healer to leave. Xenia gulped as the king's eyes squinted at her. "I will have your room guarded for the night, Zen. And I do hope that you won't repeat the same mistake again. Don't be stubborn and please don't test my patience because I have none. Now rest and tomorrow, you will start your duties as my warrior.servant. Someone who will personally attend to my needs. Someone who will follow me wherever I go. Someone who will stay by my side at all times." The king just left after delivering those words. Xenia was dumbfounded that all she could do was blink in disbelief at what she just heard. Is he even for real? Xenia mused with a twitched mouth, wondering if being thrown into the pit would be way better. She heaved a long deep sigh and murmured, "At least I'm still breathing and I should be more grateful for that, right? It wouldn't be bad to travel with the king tomorrow and maybe it would benefit her more somehow." Yet, she could not help but feel suspicious with how the king was treating her well so far. "All right, let's do as he wishes for now, Xenia, and act as his warrior.servant. Let's just think of a plan of escape once we reach Ebodia," Xenia thought with a sigh before dozing off to sleep. Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hours had passed, and the sun was almost up when Darius opened his eyes. He took a deep breath and let out a loud sigh as he remained on his bed, staring at the ceiling of his bed. Chamber. Last night, He couldn't sleep at all because of his dilemma about Zen, so he did nothing but quietly observe the lad's movements from the other chamber. Something was telling him that Zen would try to escape that night, so he patiently waited. And true enough, the lad did try to escape. He even telepathically instructed his men to let Zen off while he followed him. He wondered what was the reason Zen wanted to escape him when the lad perfectly knew that his action was screaming treason against him. Darius let out another sigh. His thoughts still lingered on Zen and he was getting frustrated over it. He groaned under his breath when he recalled the dinner last night. He couldn't take his eyes off Zen, and that meant taking note of the lad's every movement. He could still recall how Zen's tongue would dart out to lick at the seam of his lips in an attempt to moist them. He knew it wasn't meant to be seductive, but the sensations it brought to his body were still too intense. His action sent a spasm of need down his body to his groin, so much so that he had to curse under his breath so many times to calm his raging need. Even Zen's expressions were too feminine. Was he really a lad? Or was he someone who was in disguise? He wanted to rip the lad out of his clothes already, but he didn't know what was stopping him from doing it. He could possibly instruct some of his female servants to check Zen, but that would be an awkward request, and for sure, it would spread like a plague throughout the kingdom, especially to the elders who were constantly pushing him to have a queen. And of course, his wolf Zeus claimed to have found their mate. It was Zeus who recognized Zen as their mate through her strong alluring scent. It was a maddening scent like no other he had smelled, and yet that damn wolf seemed to be playing a prank on him. Still, was Zen really a man? What if he was? What would he do then? Would the Almighty truly play him like this? The council would never accept Zen if he ever did end up being male, just from the indisputable fact that they would never be able to produce an heir, inevitably putting his throne and his kingdom's stability in danger. He couldn't lose his throne just like that. He couldn't let all of the sacrifices that were made for him to secure this position be rendered futile. He had worked very hard to earn this position, and he wouldn't dare squander it even though his wolf, Zeus, and him wouldn't see eye to eye. Darius's face darkened as the memories of that painful night, of him losing the people he loved and treasured around him, surfaced once again. However, he immediately calmed himself. It wasn't good to let those memories resurface back to the forefront of his mind. He only had one goal in his rule: to unite every pack in their kingdom and establish a vital realm against all others who would try to conquer them. Getting up from the bed, his usual servants immediately came inside to serve him and prepare him for his travels. He motioned for Dale, his main attendant, to step closer to him and said, "When we return, teach Zen how to serve me properly. He will replace you starting tomorrow. Zen will also personally serve me with all my needs." Dale suddenly went down on his knees. "Your Majesty. I deserve to die. I was unable to serve you properly." The king couldn't help but laugh as he grabbed Dale by his shoulders and helped him to stand back up. "Don't exaggerate, Dale. I am not removing you. You will still work for me when it comes to other things. But for now, I need to keep that warrior, Zen, close to me. He will be my warrior servant in and out of the castle," he explained. Dale smiled and nodded in understanding. "Is it because I'm getting older, Your Majesty?" his trusted aide asked, with his head bowed down a bit. Darius sighed loudly and replied, "You're like a father to me, Dale. I'm not replacing you because you're old, but because I'm sure you also need enough rest after tirelessly serving me and my father for years. Of all the people who work under me, it's you that I trust the most. Like I said, this is just temporary." The old man sighed but smiled at him in understanding. "Now, help me get ready," Darius commanded, and Dale immediately went to work along with the rest of the attendants. After the king got ready, he dismissed his servants and walked straight to the secret door that connected to the other room where Zen was sleeping. Zen was still asleep on her bed. Darius could easily breathe in his scent, which seemed to fill the room even from a distance. Darius silently praised himself for coming up with the brilliant idea of making Zen his personal warrior servant. Zen might have had an unpleasant reaction to the news, but he didn't mind it so long as he could solve this problem without having to personally strip the man out of his clothes. That would be too extreme a reaction regardless of if he turned out to be a woman or a man. On top of that, it would make him look desperate, and the last thing he wanted was for his warrior to question his behavior and ruin his reputation. If Zen would stay close by his side, then he would eventually find out if he was a man or not. He would trust Zeus on his instinct for now since he was his wolf, and his wolf wouldn't put him in an awkward position regarding this his mate thing. Silently, he approached the peaceful being and stared at his small face. Leaning down, his eyes focused to observe his face more closely and keenly. Darius unknowingly looked at his lips. As he had observed before, they were red, plump, and heart-shaped. He gulped, finding himself leaning closer to Zen's lips when he suddenly halted as Zen opened his eyes. Chapter 14. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as she opened her eyes from what felt like a deep slumber, she expected to be met with the blinding daylight, but instead, she met those dark gray orbs. What? She thought to herself. Blinking a couple of times she looked at the man hovering over her, and alarms went off in her body when she realized how close the king was to her. If any of them moved even an inch, their lips might meet. Panicked, she threw her arms forward and pushed the king away from her. He stumbled a few steps back. As soon as she realized what she did, it was too late. The king, who composed himself rather quickly, casually walked over, and sat on the chair near the bed with a dark expression on his face. What the hell? Xenia inwardly cried. She was still half asleep when she opened her eyes, but all of her drowsiness quickly gave way to panicked alertness after her nerves got worked up from the sudden closeness. She unconsciously touched her chest, feeling the loud thumping of her heart as she tried to compose herself. I will not punish you for waking up late as I know you needed a proper night of sleep due to your injuries. However, make sure this tardiness doesn't happen again, the king coldly chided. He didn't say anything about her trying to escape. Xenia took that as a good sign. The king continued, you have to wake up before me and prepare all of the things that I would need in the morning. He then stood up and passed her a clean set of clothes. Take a shower and wear this. Make it quick, he whispered. Getting out of bed, Xenia frowned when she noticed that the king didn't seem to be leaving her chambers. Is there anything else, your majesty? She asked with a frown. Won't you need any help? I will be generous and help you bathe and get dressed since you are injured. That way I can also check your wounds and see if they're all fully healed. Xenia's jaw dropped when she heard his ridiculous claim. What is happening? Why is he being so clingy all of a sudden? Xenia whined to herself. Why did a king even have to bother with her so much? She could already tell that something was suspicious. Or, on second thought, she realized that he believed that she was his possession since he saved her life, but acting like this seemed so out of his own element. Xenia arched her brows as she asked, I beg your pardon, your majesty, but I can do it on my own. Well, I don't doubt that you can. If you're uncomfortable with me, then how about letting my servant Dale and the others help you out? The king insisted. Seriously. Please, your majesty. There's really no need for that since I prefer doing my own chores. Like you said earlier, we need to leave soon, right? Can I please have my privacy now so that I can finish my morning chores soon? Xenia asked with a forced smile on her face. She was trying not to offend the king as much as possible, but his insistence on invading her personal space was starting to infuriate her. As you wish then, the king answered. Xenia was dumbfounded by the expression on his face. Why did it seem like the king was actually pouting? She thought inwardly as she saw him step out of her chambers. Noticing some strange steps in the bathroom, she went to take a look. Xenia waited a while before dismissing the servants inside as soon as she saw that they finished preparing her bath. She then took off her clothes, but not before she double-checked to ensure that everyone had already left the room. Shaking her head, she then gave her body a once-over. She was surprised to see that there were no scars left from her wounds. Tara really did a great job in combining her medical and magical skills to heal her injuries quickly and perfectly. And speaking of Tara, she had heard nothing about her. She sincerely hoped that the healer hadn't left Corden yet like she said she would. It felt nice to be friends with her. Maybe she should ask her to join them on their journey to her kingdom, Ebodia. Sinking in, Xenia let her body soak in the warmth of the water while still being in awe at the hospitality the king was showing towards her. However, what she couldn't fathom was why he was even bothering himself with her. Was it because he was simply fond of her and admired her fighting skills? Or was there something else she was missing? She shook her head as she gave up on the thought. She decided not to ponder too much on the matter as she had to hurry and report to the king. Drying herself off, she was about to step out when a servant knocked on the door. She hurriedly put on the clothes that the king had prepared for her. "His Majesty is already waiting for you in the dining hall. If you could please follow me," the servant informed when she opened the door. Xenia nodded, following the servant as they started walking. The dining hall was located on the ground floor of the castle, and it took a while for them to reach the aforementioned room. His Majesty often dines with his Moonlight Knights, the highest-ranking officers in his personal cavalry, especially before he's leaving for travels, the servant informed. Xenia simply nodded, not overthinking about it. She knew enough about the kingdom of Corden since her father had made sure that his children studied the rituals and customs of every kingdom within their sphere of influence. Darius was the supreme alpha among all of the alphas of each werewolf pack inside Corden. There were many packs within the kingdom, but everyone was obliged to follow and pledge their loyalties to the king, the supreme alpha among the alphas of the packs. Nearing their destination, Xenia could hear loud voices coming from beyond the door even from a distance. "These men are too loud," she inwardly complained. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself to calm down as she maintained her disguise. Soon enough, they entered a big dining hall, and Xenia froze upon seeing a lot of men inside the room. There were females too, but she gulped at the thought of seeing so much muscle in one place. All of them were obviously werewolves, given their muscular build and how little clothes they wore. And although female werewolves had covered up a bit more, the fabric they wore was very thin and clung to their curvy bodies perfectly. The clothes in her kingdom were far more conservative compared to that of the kingdom of Corden. As soon as her footsteps echoed throughout the hall, all eyes immediately went to her sudden arrival. Already, she felt the scrutinizing gaze from most of the hall's occupants, with her being a new face inside the huge dining hall. This is definitely not what they called fashionably late, it was miserably late. Chapter 15. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zen. Come over here. Xenia recognized Leon's voice as he chided her to sit next to him. He was seated on the left side of the long table with the king at the center. Following the servant, Xenia was led to her seat, which was somehow placed next to the king. She stood there, wondering if it was appropriate for her to even sit there. Surely this table with the king was reserved for his high-ranking officers. Being hesitant to sit, she found herself leaning towards the king as she whispered, "Your Majesty, I can sit in some of the vacant chairs along with the others on another table. I don't have to sit with such a prestigious group of people." Looking around, there were other tables meant for the other packs and their members. In truth, she would prefer to eat with them and stay as low-profile as possible. "Ah, Your Majesty. Is he Zen?" The warrior Gideon claimed to have killed all the barbarians and rogue werewolves, the man sitting on the opposite side of the king questioned. Xenia could feel his scrutinizing gaze on herself. This was so not a low profile. She thought. "Sit here, Zen," the king commanded, so Xenia had no choice but to sit next to him. Gideon, who was sitting on her left side, gave her a reassuring smile before answering the man, "Do you have no trust in my words that you have to ask our Majesty about it? Ah, how about we finish our breakfast first? When we return from the travels, you can take Zen to the training ground, he will surely allow you to test his skills and prove that I only spoke nothing but the truth about how good he is in combat despite his weak appearance. That is if I'm even able to return from there. Xenia thought as her mouth twitched. Her guilt would never let her leave her little sister to her doom because of her own impulsive decisions and actions. I would be glad to test his skills once we return. Would you give me that opportunity, little Zen? The man asked her with a polite smile. Xenia turned to look at him and simply replied, sure. She trailed off, unable to continue as she was unsure of how to properly address the man. Helas. Just call me Helas, he said. Xenia smiled at him, seeing as he seemed very approachable. She had heard a lot about him before. She knew that Helas was the alpha of the Silver Crescent pack in Cordon. Stop talking and eat. We need to leave soon. The king suddenly interrupted with a frown. Xenia pouted her lips as she started eating along with the rest of them. After a while, she noticed that the king was frowning as he ate. She frowned too. Did she do something to displease him again? He seemed to be annoyed ever since she came in to dine with them. Supposing that he was annoyed, then why even bother to ask her to join in the first place? She focused on her food, trying her best not to ponder on how gloomy Darius's expression currently was and just concentrated on her mannerisms. If there was one thing in Xenia's disguise that she couldn't master, it was her way of eating. Against her own wishes, her movements were still finessed and flawless like a woman since she hated eating in a rush. Wow, you're as graceful as a woman even while eating, Leon complimented with a grin. Ah, please don't get offended. I'm honestly fascinated with how graceful you are. You are almost too cute looking like that. The unsolicited comments almost made Xenia choke on her own food. She inwardly cursed herself for being so careless. Composing herself, she gave Leon a bashful smile as she said, "You, my lord, are graceful as well." Leon burst out in a fit of laughter and said, "Oh please. Stop with the formalities. Here in our kingdom, you can address everyone using their names, except for our king, of course, the council of elders, and high-ranking officers like our Lord Helas. So feel free to address me only as Leon. I've heard that the Cordon has many packs or groups of powerful werewolves. There are supposedly a considerable number of alphas in this kingdom and the king personally chose a few to comprise his Moonlight Knights," Xenia spoke up, trying to make a productive conversation. "Yes, and our king chose a few, like how Gideon is the alpha of the Black Claw, Bardas the alpha of the Lockhart, and Sarah the alpha of the Midnight. Those three are the commanders of Moonlight Knights with our king as the Grand Commander. We are a total of 12 and you will meet the rest eventually. They are not present right now like Commander Sarah who's escorting the Queen Mother so she's not here. The elders are pressing about the matters for you having a queen." Helas brought the topic out of the blue. The king almost choked on his own drink that he had just sipped. Leon laughed and remarked, "You should take pity on our great Constable Helas, your highness. He's the one receiving all the bombardment from our elders while you're away." Xenia creased her forehead and unknowingly voiced out, "Werewolves have mates, right? I mean, a mate, like the partner the Almighty chose for every werewolf. Your inner wolf has the gift of smell to identify its mate. A scent that would pull you to your mate no matter what. A mate pull." Xenia became aware of it because of her close friend Jaira, one of the mages in their kingdom, who loved to talk about supernatural beings with her like werewolves, vampires and more. The king coughed more and Xenia's eyes darted to him as she asked, "I'm right?" "Right. Wow, looks like Zen is very well versed about our kind." Leon praised. Xenia only smiled bashfully. "But apparently, our king hasn't found his mate for a decade now since his ruling as a king, so it's only natural for our elders to pressure him." Gideon nonchalantly commented and Xenia frowned seeing how Gideon eyed her suspiciously before he shifted his gaze to the king. "What's with his look?" Xenia mused. She looked in Gideon's direction but the latter seemingly avoided meeting her gaze this time. She was about to say something when the king spoke. You're right about the mate and mate pull, but I'm not the type who would simply settle with the tradition. I don't simply believe in it. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius had almost forgotten about the pressing matters from the elders. He let out a sigh and growled, can't they see how capable I am as a ruler? I don't need a mate to become a great king. I already am one. Yet his wolf Zeus snarled at him in disagreement. You definitely need a mate. And she's sitting right beside you, dumbass. How come you don't believe it when you're obviously experiencing the mate pull? Zeus suddenly retorted. Darius simply ignored his wolf's grumpiness and looked at Hellas. If they bring up the topic again while I'm away, then tell them that we will proceed for the selection of a queen. Hellas nodded. Another sigh escaped Darius as his eyes drifted back to Zen. Yes, he admitted that he needed a mate, as a man for his future heirs, of course he did. So it was only logical that the said mate to at least be a female. How many times do I have to tell you that Zen is not a man? Zeus annoyingly retorted. To see is to believe. Until, and unless I witness it with my own eyes and confirm that he's not a man, I won't believe you. Darius scowled back. I thought you were willing to trust me with this one. Why not just strip Zen out of her clothes and check right now? The impulsive wolf chided. Darius ignored Zeus and cast a scrutinizing gaze on Zen. He could only hope that Zeus was right. By the way, Zen, I heard that you had been hurt during a fight recently. Are you sure you're doing better now and are fit to travel? Hellas asked. Darius saw the bright smile that formed on Zen's face while having eye contact with Hellas. He did not know what came to him, so he instantly coughed. He sounded like he was clearing his throat before further saying, focus solely on your breakfasts. We need to depart soon. I will bring along Zen because the healer confirmed that Zen is fit to travel. Darius coughed once more and then gave Zen and Hellas a look saying the discussion should be over. Darius couldn't help getting irritated at what he was seeing. He didn't want to see Zen smiling like that at other men. The beast in him was acting too possessive over Zen, and he couldn't help but react to it. Maybe Zeus was right. Maybe Zen was indeed his mate, even if such a possibility seemed too irrational for his tastes. But to Darius's surprise, Zen ignored him as the lad smiled back to Hellas and said, I'm doing great, Lord Hellas. Healer Terra did a great job in healing me. Zen then looked at Darius and said, Your Majesty, is it possible to ask for Healer Terra to also join us in this journey? Darius was speechless and looked at Gideon, who quickly answered, Your Majesty, the healer already left before the sunrise, saying that she has an important journey ahead of her, but she reassured that Zen would no longer need her or any healer since he's perfectly fine by now. Zen's shoulders dropped, but her face suddenly lit up when Hellas said, I'm sure you'll make more friends here, Zen, especially when you return. The healer is a fine woman and really beautiful, so no wonder our Zen here looks smitten by her, and I bet he will even fake sicknesses just for Healer Terra to check on him. Leon teased. Darius's forehead creased as he stared at Zen. Did he just blush? He mused, utterly confused. Isn't she adorable? Zeus interrupted. Blushing because of a woman. Darius snorted. It's a perfect act for her disguise, so let her be. Zeus countered. Darius no longer pondered on about it and continued eating. As soon as he finished his meal, he rose from his chair. He looked at Zen and said, Follow me. Having no other choice, Zen did as instructed while the other chosen members of the king's Moonlight Knights who were to accompany Darius in his journey followed. Still in his seat, Hellas followed them as they left, his eyes keenly staring at Zen. He looked so familiar, Hellas whispered as he tried to ponder where he had seen that lad before. Outside the castle, the horses were ready. Darius signaled Zen to hop onto the black horse, and then he hopped onto the horse and sat behind Zen. I can ride a horse on my own. Zen exclaimed at the sudden closeness. I know. But I prefer that you ride it with me, Darius plainly replied. He signaled the others to begin their journey as he grabbed the reins of his horse. As always, Darius traveled on the front line with his knights. The others were behind him except for Gideon and Bardas, who were on his right and left sides, respectively. "Your Majesty, do we really need to bring the lad on this journey?" Bardas telepathically asked. Telepathically talking to each other was one of the special powers of werewolves. It was a mind-link ability between werewolves that they could shut off any time they wanted. But as the supreme alpha and king of the kingdom of Corden, he had the authority over all his werewolf subjects regarding the mind-link matters. "Zen is now my warrior servant, so he goes wherever I go," Darius plainly answered. Gideon and Bardas could only exchange meaningful glances at that answer. None dared to question him, and Darius appreciated that. Darius heaved out a sigh. He could smell Zen's intoxicating scent wafting in front of him, surrounding him, and their close proximity was driving him crazy. He inwardly cursed at Zeus. It was that damn wolf who had convinced him to make the hasty decision of riding the same horse with Zen. Without him knowing, he found himself leaning closer and inhaling more of Zen's scent. He smelled so good that his blood was boiling with great desire. Catching himself, Darius immediately scolded himself after realizing what he was about to do. He was so absorbed in breathing in Zen's alluring scent that he had forgotten that Gideon and Bardas were both galloping next to him on either side. Thinking quickly, he whipped the reins of his horse and increased his pace. That way, neither of them would witness how he was almost burying his nose into Zen's neck. Otherwise, they would think that he was a pervert drooling over some mere lad. Chapter 17. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Don't you shape-shift so you can travel faster?" Xenia mumbled, not bothering to argue about having her own horse. She could already tell that she would only be wasting her voice over it. "We do, but only when we smell danger coming," the king replied before he whipped the reins of his horse and increased his pace to get ahead of the others. Xenia felt weird for some reason. It was her first time riding a horse with a man almost hugging her back, and she felt that there was something unexplainable about it. She could feel his warmth due to their close proximity. She looked at the sky and wondered, why does it feel hot when the sun is not even that bright? "What is it?" the king whispered in her ear. Xenia's heart leaped as all the hairs on the back of her neck stood on their ends. His hot breath on her ear made her stomach twist. Did she not eat enough that her stomach was acting weirdly? Or was it because she ate something spoiled? She frowned, feeling annoyed about the mixed feelings that she was having because of this king. Abruptly, she turned around, her eyes widening in shock when her lips touched the corner of his mouth. She quickly turned her head back as she stammered, What's wrong with you? Why is your head so close to mine?" Xenia was going crazy on the inside because of what happened, not to mention how the king did not even bother to say a word. She was stunned at how their lips accidentally touched. But then if the king could act nonchalant about it, so she should do the same. She ended up biting her lower lip as she controlled herself to utter any more words that could make the situation more embarrassing. It was unbelievable though, how distracted she was when she was supposed to be focusing on how to switch places with her sister Minnie. She had pondered about it enough, she thought. She had decided that she had to save her sister no matter what. Thinking about the logistics of it all, she knew she still had enough time to swap with her sister and marry the vampire king instead. A few moments later, it was Xenia who could no longer take the awkward atmosphere that she suddenly asked, "Your Majesty, is Lord Hela's part of the Moonlight Knights?" trying to ease the tension that she was feeling. "No, he's not. He's my great constable." "Why? You sound interested in him." "It's just that I've heard a lot about him during my stay in Ebodia," Xenia quickly explained. "You're from Ebodia?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Xenia genuinely replied. "Well, Hela's mother was from the kingdom of Ebodia, so I suppose that it is inevitable." "I'm sure that they praise him a lot over there," the king wryly commented. Xenia unconsciously chuckled, "Yeah, they do. They are proud of him, especially since he was the last man to stand against you and fight for the throne a decade ago. They almost thought that the Silver Crescent Pack would finally get a hold of the throne of the Kingdom of Corden when he did that. Is that so? I hate to disappoint, but it turned out that I am better than him, the king arrogantly stated, almost making Xenia choke on her own saliva. That was such a stupid thing to say. She wanted to bang her head for being inconsiderate after realizing what she had just stated. I am sorry for being so insensitive, Your Majesty, she tersely apologized. It's fine. You're simply relaying what you heard. But what about you, Zen? Do you also think Helas is better than me? The king curiously asked. Xenia got flustered when she heard his question. Honestly, there were a lot of negative opinions about the werewolf king in their kingdom, which was also why her father chose to marry her off to the Valkyries king instead of him. Her father had considered marrying her to the Corden king if he were to be Helas. But unfortunately, Helas lost the fight in the battle for the throne 10 years ago, making Darius the king. The Corden kingdom would only conduct the said battle for the throne after the current king was dethroned, gravely ill to rule, or had passed away. Throughout the realms, King of Corden had a reputation of being a heartless ruler who mostly disobeyed the elders and did whatever he thought was right and best regardless of the advice given to him. To put it simply, he was someone who was reckless and willful without any fear of consequence. Honestly, I don't know how to answer your question since I don't know you that well, Your Majesty. I don't judge people without getting to know them, so, Xenia trailed off, making the king smile without her knowing. Well, you have plenty of time to get to know me, especially now that you are my personal servant and warrior. Let me know what you think of me afterwards, the king nodded, sounding to be in a good mood. As time ticked on, the journey seemed to stretch on too long for Xenia, so she couldn't help but mumble, Your Highness, I can't wait to reach Abodia and walk around the kingdom before the wedding ceremony. Do you think that it's possible for us to travel a bit faster? That can only happen if I shape-shift into a wolf. Do you think you can manage to mount me without falling? All you need to do is to hug and hold on to me tightly, making sure not to let go, the king submissively said. Don't worry, Your Majesty. That's a very easy task for me, Xenia excitedly replied. I am honored to see your wolf form and share a ride with you. All right then. We shall do that henceforth, the king declared as he stopped his horse. Watching him come down from his horse, Gideon told her to turn her head away from the king, so she did. You can now look, Zen, Gideon informed her, so she turned her head back to look in the king's direction. Her eyes widened upon seeing the king transformed into a wolf. Chapter 18. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The king had turned into a huge wolf, his shining silver coat shimmering with hints of golden hue as they brushed against the wind. She had never even dreamt that a wolf could look so large and majestic. He was practically almost twice her height. He then stretched down, almost kneeling. He's giving you permission to climb, Gideon commented after seeing her stand mindlessly without a clue of what to do. Oh, won't I fall? Xenia asked with a whisper. No, you won't. Just hold on to him tightly. Won't that hurt him? She worriedly asked, stretching her hand out to touch and caress King Darius's head. He looked very fluffy and adorable in his wolf form, unlike most rogue werewolves she had witnessed before. Those all turned into terrible monsters in the end. Such a little amount of strength won't hurt him, okay? Gideon chuckled, His Majesty is not a very patient person, so please mount him soon before he changes his mind and turns back into a human. Okay, she hesitantly answered as she positioned herself to mount His Majesty. But just as she was about to raise her legs, Gideon called out to her once more. Oh, wait. Please carry this with you. Turning to him, Xenia watched as Gideon took something tied onto his horse and gave it to her. It's His Majesty's clothes. Make sure you don't lose them. We wouldn't want him attending the ceremony naked or in his wolf form, Zen. Coming back to her senses, Xenia nodded to Gideon before finally climbing up to hop on Darius's back. It was a necessity, she thought to herself. She had to reach the kingdom of Ebodia as soon as possible and swap places with her sister. Slowly climbing onto Darius's back, she hugged his neck as tightly as she could without hurting him, holding on to her dear life as she waited for him to move. Soon enough, King Darius started to run. Xenia lost her breath as she held on. He was moving so fast that she had to squint her eyes to protect herself from the wind blowing in her face. Good thing that my wig wasn't a cheap and ordinary piece. Otherwise, it would have already been blown away by the wind, she thanked her luck. She had always worn a special wig that would refuse to move from her head unless she removed it herself, or else, her gender would have been discovered by now. As the wind continued to hit her from all directions, she began to feel the stinging cold getting to her. However, the rush of adrenaline she was experiencing compensated for the sudden chill she was experiencing. Surely riding a wolf at very high speed was incomparable to riding a horse. This is so wonderful, she exclaimed with a broad smile on her face. It was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and she couldn't wait to just boast about it in front of her brother and sister once she reached her kingdom. I probably won't have enough time to do it though. I will have to travel with the Vampire King to the kingdom of Valkrez as soon as the wedding ceremony ends, she gravely reminded herself. She only had a limited time to spend with her siblings. The wedding ceremony was at night, however. So hopefully, they could arrive at the kingdom of Ebodia before sunset. Xenia didn't know how long they had been traveling, but she could bet that it was already noon when His Majesty suddenly stopped and leaned down, signaling her to disembark from his back. As such, she did. And in that instant, he suddenly shape-shifted back to his human form. Xenia's eyes widened. He was standing completely naked. But before her eyes could go even further down, she immediately closed them and turned around while covering her eyes with her palms. Your Majesty! How could you shape-shift in front of me without any warning? The king laughed out loud and scoffed, Zen, how could I warn you in my wolf form? You're not even a werewolf for me to telepathically communicate with you. And for goodness sake, why do you look so flustered seeing a man naked? Are you not a man yourself? Hearing him, Xenia snapped herself back to reality. She almost forgot that she was pretending to be a man. Immediately grabbing Darius's clothes from the bag Gideon gave her, she presented the bundle of clothes to him without even looking. Here are your clothes, Your Majesty. Darius frowned, why are you handing it over to me? Help me put it on. Xenia gulped, I'm his warrior servant, so it's natural that he asks me to help him get dressed. What did I put myself into? She mentally shook her head. She had to keep up with her appearances. Steeling herself, Xenia calmed herself and met the king's gaze. I will help you get dressed then, Your Majesty, Xenia stated with an awkward smile. However, this is my first time doing this kind of thing. So please be merciful and lenient if I make mistakes. Please guide me and teach me how to do it properly. The king suspiciously looked at Xenia and ordered, just put the damn clothes on me, Zen. At his harsh words, Xenia moved quickly, bending down to help him with his trousers. Give me that, he commanded, feeling just as flustered as her when she bent down. Thank heavens, she silently thought, feeling relieved as she handed the article of clothing to him. She realized that she was indeed acting weird for a man. My cape. Put it on me, he commanded again, so Xenia moved and almost hugged Darius while wrapping the cape around his body. He's so warm, she thought. He also had a pleasing smell which she couldn't help but breathe in. Xenia quickly took a step back. Her heart hammered in her chest and she wondered why she was feeling like that. The intense stare that the king was giving her had this weird effect on her. Chills ran down her bones, not because of fear or anything, but because his gaze was so penetrating that it could make anyone's knees feel so weak, even someone as daring as Xenia herself. What is happening? Chapter 19 You are listening at novelfull.audio. The king walked closer to her, and she instinctively stepped back. She was acting really weird as a man right now, and it was only making the risk of her exposing herself rise even higher. Xenia, snap out of it already. Why are you trembling like this? She silently scolded herself, feeling annoyed and confused by her own reactions. What are you doing, Your Majesty? She managed to gasp out. The king didn't reply. Instead, he continued his path on cornering her till her back hit the trunk of a big tree. She gulped when his arms then pinned her, caging her in his arms. This isn't good, her mind shouted, not at all. She felt as if her frenetic heart was about to explode. Why am I feeling tense and nervous? And what is this strange and abnormal churning in my stomach for no reason? This is not acceptable. Her mind kept talking to her as she looked at the king with wide eyes, her expression almost like that of a little rabbit trapped in a net. What the hell is wrong with this king? She inwardly retorted, blaming her dilemma on the king's unusual movements. Watching the bewildered expressions on her face, the king moved his face closer until it was just an inch apart from hers. Tell me, Zen, why is your face so red? Do you know how weird you're acting right now for a warrior servant? I told you, it's my first time doing all this, she stuttered. I don't even know much about being a servant. If you only wanted a warrior, then I would definitely not be acting weird. The king's stare was so intimidating that Xenia honestly felt that she could melt and drown in his eyes at the drop of a hat. She unconsciously bit her lower lip. Her face blushed even harder as the king's eyes darted to her lips. Was she hallucinating, or was the king actually looking at her lips with a different glint in his eyes? Looking closely, her eyes widened, thinking about what she just saw in his eyes. Lust. Desire. Was her interpretation correct? Did the werewolf king desire a lad? She was in a male disguise. Or maybe. Did he see past her disguise already? Xenia gathered herself and managed to push the king away with her palms on his chest. His chest, so strong and sturdy. Catching her thoughts, she immediately retracted her palms from his warm chest. She honestly felt like her hands were suddenly burnt by his hot touch. Your Majesty, we should move. We're stalling too much. And aren't you hungry already? It's almost noon, Xenia quickly explained, doing her best to not look at his face. She knew she looked weird right now, with her face turned sideways as she talked. The king walked ahead and said, "Follow me. There's a village nearby. We will stop there to eat and get a horse." Wow, we truly did travel in a flash. His Majesty's wolf form is so majestic and cute, and you were fast as lightning when you ran. Xenia boldly expressed her amazement and admiration as she followed the king. She needed a great distraction from the tense atmosphere a while ago, and hopefully striking up a light conversation like this would work. To be honest, that was my first time witnessing someone shape-shifting. More often than not. How would I say this? I've only witnessed the scary shape-shifting so far, Xenia hesitatingly added. That's the wolf-man form, the king immediately explained. We can shape-shift into 3 forms, human form, the wolf-man form, and the wolf form. I suppose the scariest form of them all is the wolf-man form. However, we are more powerful in that state. She simply nodded. Xenia was aware of it, but still, it was good to hear the exact details from a powerful werewolf himself. I see, Xenia whispered. Her eyes then wandered out into the distance, noticing a small settlement peeking out of the horizon. I can see the village. She excitedly burst out as she even ran towards it. As soon as they saw the emblem of royalty on the king's cape, the villagers immediately paid their respect to him by slightly bowing down. Inside the inn, the king sat on a vacant table signaling Xenia to sit in front of him. He then gestured to the innkeepers and servants to raise their heads as he instructed, "Serve us lunch and get us a horse." "Just one horse, Your Majesty?" the innkeeper asked. "Can you?" "Yes, just one," the king firmly answered, cutting Xenia off from talking. Xenia gulped. She couldn't hide her disappointment. She simply didn't understand why the king preferred for them to ride together when riding on a separate horse would be more convenient. Hearing his request, the innkeeper nodded before excusing himself. Xenia let out a sigh. She intently looked at the king and asked, "Your Majesty, isn't it a bit uncomfortable for us to be riding on just one horse?" The king raised an eyebrow as he authoritatively replied, "And why would I let you travel on a separate horse? Who knows what you're up to outside my kingdom? What if you decided to escape again and leave me all of a sudden? Your life is mine. As such, I want to make sure that I keep an eye on what is mine." Xenia blinked in disbelief. Does it mean that he had no plans of leaving her alone once they reached Ebodia? If that was the case, then she needed a plan to make sure that she could sneak out of his sight. Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Inside the dining area of the inn, Xenia did not notice how the king gazed at her keenly while eating. "Slow down, will you?" The king scolded while Xenia scarfed down the food so quickly that she didn't even bother to chew properly. "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'm just very hungry," Xenia lied. In reality, she was actually eating in a hurry because she was desperate to reach the castle before the wedding day. She just knew that her sister Minnie must already be feeling terrified. Once more, she scolded herself for running away, letting her guilt consume her as she imagined Minnie's pale face. She probably feels like a sacrificial lamb getting ready for her death. Damn. Fuck my luck, she silently cursed. She couldn't believe that her father had decided to continue on with the wedding even after she ran away. Did my father take the extreme route of deceiving the Valkyries king by marrying him off to his second daughter instead? There were too many questions and assumptions circulating inside her head. "Do you personally know the vampire king of Valkyries, Your Highness?" Xenia curiously asked the king. She had a feeling that him and the Valkyries king would have already met. I guess you can say that. Nikolai and I attended the same training facility at Mount Sorrel when we were still young," the king plainly answered. "I can say that his kingdom and mine have a good relationship." "I see. Do you think he will make a good husband? After all, he is a vampire who is marrying a human. He won't treat the princess as his personal blood bank and drain her dry, right?" That question earned a fit of laughter from the king. Xenia looked at him in awe, as it was the first time that she had witnessed the man laugh so freely. How adorable, she unconsciously thought, but quickly shook her head to erase it from the forefront of her mind. "What's so funny?" she asked with a frown. "Well, Nikolai. How should I put it? He's quite different from other vampires," the king explained. "He practices veganism, or vegetarianism, or something like that. I forgot what he used to call it, but he doesn't drink human blood unless it's someone he personally killed. He's more into animal blood, so I'm sure the princess will be perfectly fine with him," he reassured. "It is actually advisable for him to marry a human to bear his offspring and increase their bloodline just like his father. It's a tradition of their royal family." "So, you mean that King Nikolai is a half-blood? He's half-human?" Zen spluttered. In the past, she had not even bothered to know more about the Valkyries king. However, she was well aware of his good reputation even if it wasn't enough to convince her to accept the marriage. She simply couldn't live in a kingdom full of vampires who drink human blood. "Yes, that's why he can withstand the sun, unlike pure-blooded vampires," the king nodded. "I honestly don't know why he even asked for an evening wedding. Probably because they love and prefer the moonlight of the night instead of the sun," he shrugged. "Anyway, why do you sound like you're very interested in the vampire king of the Valkyries kingdom?" The king scoffed with snapped eyebrows. "Well, I guess everyone would be interested in him. After all, isn't this wedding nothing but a marriage alliance between kingdoms?" Xenia chided. "I know. The king of Ebodia seems to be taking desperate measures for some reason. I wouldn't be surprised if he would offer me his second daughter," the king pondered. "King Stefan, how should I put this? He is a very cunning king, using his daughters as pawns to, no. He's not like that, Xenia cut him off. He loves his daughters a lot. It's just that he is willing to sacrifice his own blood for the welfare of his people. That's what a true leader does. Doing something that would benefit his people even if it meant that he has to sacrifice his own blood. You're idolizing him too much, aren't you? The king raised an eyebrow. However, I beg to disagree. If I were in his shoes, I simply would make sure that no harm could befall my family in my reign. I would ensure the welfare of my people without sacrificing any of my blood, he bragged. Xenia only scrunched her face, not bothering to argue with him since everyone was entitled to their own opinions. You seem to be disagreeing. The king asked with an arched brow. Of course, not. I wouldn't dare debate, Your Majesty. If you'll excuse me, I will finish my plate, Xenia defensively murmured as she ate clumsily, smearing some sauce on her lips. Hearing her commotion, the king darted his eyes towards her and paused. What? Xenia hissed when she noticed the king staring intently at her. She was still annoyed about their argument and was in no mood to entertain him. You do realize that I can have your tongue cut for speaking the way you did and disrespecting me, right? The king calmly warned, making Xenia gulp in apprehension. Clearing her throat, she quickly apologized, Forgive me, Your Majesty. I guess I've simply been wandering for far too long that I've forgotten proper etiquette. The king, still ogling at her, said, Next time, be careful, especially when there are other people nearby. I may not be as lenient then as I am now. I understand, Your Majesty, Xenia mumbled out as she nodded her head. Inwardly, she berated herself for being so careless and forgetting that she was a servant. However, since they were almost near her kingdom, she would soon be in her safe zone, so she might as well reveal her identity to this brute and brusque king once the opportunity arrived. I wonder how he would react if he finds out that I am one of the royals too. Looking back at him, he was still staring at her, which made Xenia blush. Thus, she politely asked, Is there something wrong with my face, Your Majesty? You smeared some sauce here, he casually stated as he touched his own lips to show her where the sauce was. Taking note, Xenia licked her lips with her tongue to get rid of it instead of using a napkin when she suddenly heard a weird groan. Xenia, with her big eyes, blinked at him and asked, Did you just growl? I did. Something stuck in my throat, the king defended himself, followed by a few coughs. Xenia no longer commented on it and focused on her food instead, but deep inside she could tell that something weird was definitely going on with how the king was acting.